The Subcommittee on Government Operations will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. And just for planning purposes, I think we're going to have votes around 11:30 today, and so it is my intention to make sure that we get out of here before the votes so that you don't have to well, just hang out in a hearing room for an hour or so while we go to vote. So if you'll keep your oral testimony as brief as possible, but certainly not over the 5 minutes. And Mr. Conley and I have agreed to try to manage that expectation to make sure that we get out of here. Still have a robust hearing, but try to keep it succinct if we can. I'm pleased to hold the oversight hearing for the General Services Administration, or GSA as it's commonly known. Obviously, GSA plays a vital role in providing real estate acquisitions and technology services to federal agencies. Some of you, this is not your first rodeo. You're back with us. Thank you so much and welcome. You know, with respect to the federal real properties, GSA owns or leases over 9,600 buildings. GSA has made some progress in reducing the federal footprint, but GSA is still relying too much on costly leases, in my opinion. Total government leases for fiscal year 2016 were well over $7 billion. And so as we look at that, I'm anxious to hear testimony on how we're going to address that. The Public Buildings Reform Board, which was created by FASTA, has been vested with a unique authority to identify and dispose of federal real properties. And I understand that GSA is working to make the board operational, and I hope board members will be nominated quickly. And that's quickly in terms of standards on Main Street, not on K Street. So that would mean expeditiously if we can do that. On the acquisition side, we continue to hear that the federal acquisition system fails to leverage the benefits of truly buying commercial. So we look forward to hearing on that. And instead of the federal procurement system is so complex and slow and often burdened with government unique regulatory requirements, making it difficult for the government to buy goods and services at the best price and in a timely manner. Over 20 years ago, Congress established a preference for using commercial items and using standard commercial terms and conditions to maximize the extent practicable, and yet the complexity seems to have increased over recent years. So I'm going to keep my opening remarks as brief as I possibly can, but as we look at that, I'll be interested to hear about the role of 18F going forward and GSA's role in promoting the IT modernization and implementing the Government Technology Act. Finally, I would like to touch on the regulatory task force work by GSA. I was encouraged by the GSA's October 2017 testimony that GSA was working on ways to remove outdated requirements in the GSA acquisition regulation and was also focused on the property management and travel regulations. So with all of that, I look forward to this being an illuminating hearing, and as we continue to move forward in making sure that our government is efficient and effective. With that, I'll recognize the ranking member, Mr. Conley, for his opening remarks.
I thank my friend, and thank you for calling today's hearing on the General Services Administration. GSA is not an agency that many Americans are familiar with, but its role in providing other federal agencies with goods and services is essential to leveraging the federal government's buying power to find efficiencies and to save taxpayer dollars. The Federal Acquisition Service helps agencies procure office supplies and telecommunication and information technology services, among other items, and hopefully we'll get the Pentagon to cooperate with that. GSA's Public Building Service acts as the government's landlord, helping agencies acquire and manage office space throughout the country. For the past 6 years, GSA has been working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation to help the Bureau find a replacement for its headquarters, which was described to Congress and the public as no longer adequate in helping the FBI fulfill its mission. This week, GSA announced that it will abandon entirely a plan to fully consolidate the headquarters of the FBI in favor of a more decentralized approach that involves the demolition and rebuilding of the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. on its current site. This followed a decision announced in July to cancel the procurement of a new consolidated FBI headquarters in either Virginia or Maryland. These announcements constitute a body blow to public confidence in the federal government's ability to effectively manage a building procurement on the scale of the proposed FBI headquarters. The federal government comes off as unreliable and whimsical at best. What damage has this done to faith in the federal procurement process? What has the cost to the private businesses, localities, and states that in good faith participated in this competition? The procurement process alone cost GSA, we believe, $20 million with nothing to show for it. The cost to the FBI has not been disclosed, but even that information would not provide a comprehensive accounting of the taxpayer dollars wasted on this project. For that, we would have to include the uncertainty developers will now price into all future business involving large-scale federal real property procurements and doing business with GSA. The decision has also had an impact on the hardworking men and women of the FBI who fight every day to keep our country safe. FBI's current headquarters is, by every account, in disrepair and literally crumbling around its employees and on the walking public outside. We have to put netting outside the building because parts of it are crumbling. Instead of a new consolidated approach near home here in the D.C. region, some of those employees now face continued uncertainty about the project and the potential relocation elsewhere. The new GSA proposal is full of contradictions and flies in the face of a decade's worth of analysis by both the GSA and the Government Accountability Office. The problems with GSA's proposal are numerous, but one need only examine the economics and security aspects to raise serious questions about this decision. In July of last year, GSA blamed the inability to secure congressional appropriations for fiscal year 2018 for canceling the project. A laughable explanation, because in fact Congress offered money and offered money not even requested, and made it, I think it was quite clear on a bipartisan basis, Congress would have provided the necessary funds for going forward with that project. So what's the agency's proposed solution to that problem? Apparently they're going to rely on Congress. A $2.2 billion appropriation request buried in the President's fictional infrastructure plan. A farce within a farce. GSA's estimate of cost savings with this new plan are also overblown. The new plan is supposedly $200 million cheaper than the previous plan to consolidate the headquarters in one location. However, the cost estimate for demolish and rebuild will likely increase, almost certainly will increase, as the project is further vetted, just as the estimate for the original consolidation project did. This new plan completely contradicts earlier plans that deemed the consolidation of the FBI components across the national capital region crucial to national security. Apparently that's out the window. This new proposed plan would ensure that the FBI is one of the only members of the intelligence and anti-terrorism community that does not have a standalone campus. So all of the concerns about the physical security and the urban setback risk at the current site also thrown out the window. CIA, DIA, NSA, and Homeland Security all have their own campuses which help mitigate physical and espionage threats, but not the FBI under this new plan. The question must be asked, if this decision has been informed by all of the administration's belief that the federal workforce should be less concentrated in Washington, D.C., and more dispersed across the country, efficiencies, cost savings, and national security apparently be damned. Alternatively, maybe it's motivated by the fact that if GSA had gone ahead with their original plan, the Hoover site would have been turned into a private development that would have directly competed with the Trump Hotel for the entirety of the lease agreement. Developing the Hoover site into a mixed-use retail, hotel, and residential development could have clearly impacted the bottom line of the President of the United States. These questions hang in the air. The lack of transparency on the part of GSA in this process is partly because It has not worked with Congress to keep it informed and has stonewalled even basic requests from this committee. GSA's resistance to oversight not only prevents Congress from performing its constitutional functions, it leads to stalled projects and appropriations, wasted taxpayer dollars, and public distrust. There will be a long-term cost to the profoundly bungled procurement of the new FBI headquarters. It will be difficult to quantify, but we can all be sure the American taxpayer will have to be forced to pick up the tab. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement. I'm now pleased to introduce our witnesses. We have with us today the Honorable Emily W. Murphy, Administrator of the General Services Administration. Welcome. The Honorable Alan B. Thomas, Jr., Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Services at GSA. Welcome, Mr. Thomas. The Honorable Dan Matthews, Commissioner of Public Building Service at GSA, and the Honorable Carol F. Ochoa, Inspector General at GSA. Welcome to you all, and pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify, so if you would please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? All right, thank you. You may be seated. Please, the record will reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative, and in order to allow time, as I mentioned earlier, for discussion, please limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes, but certainly your entire written statement will be made part of the record. Ms. Murphy, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Connolly, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Emily Murphy, and I'm the new Administrator of the General Services Administration. With me today are Dan Matthews, Commissioner of the Public Building Service, and Alan Thomas, Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service. Thank you for your invitation to testify. GSA's mission is to deliver value and savings in real estate, acquisition, technology, and other mission support services across the government. Today, GSA provides critical space to federal agencies in nearly 8,700 buildings. Additionally, GSA facilitated $55 billion in acquisitions in fiscal year 2017. This includes $31 billion directly from GSA's multiple award schedules program. As administrator, my vision for GSA can be distilled into 4 principles: ethical leadership, reducing duplication, increasing competition, and improving transparency. In the spirit of reducing duplication, I won't subject you to additional testimonies from either Commissioner Matthews or Commissioner Thomas. Allow me to spend a few minutes discussing some of these principles with examples of some of GSA's work. Given the major role GSA plays in managing real estate and overseeing acquisition, we strive to ensure the American taxpayer is put first in all that we do. To accomplish this, GSA must have a culture that values contributions from all employees and is built on a strong foundation of ethical conduct. One of my first acts at GSA was to quadruple the amount of ethics training required for political appointees at GSA, and then to work with the Inspector General to establish specific training for appointees by her office. Ensuring that senior staff are held to the highest standards helps instill a culture of integrity throughout the agency. Additionally, I've sat on the benches behind you as a Hill staffer for 9 years, and let me state unequivocally that I strongly believe in the value of oversight and will be as forthcoming as possible with regard to all oversight requests. I also plan to rely heavily on the work of the Inspector General and GAO. Ms. Ochoa and I have monthly meetings, and she and her team provide valuable reporting that helps make GSA better. I look forward to meeting with the representatives from the GAO in the coming weeks. My second principle is reducing duplication. Keeping in mind our role as stewards of taxpayer dollars, it is essential that GSA identify ways to reduce duplication within our agency and across the federal government. For real property disposal and consolidation, GSA is leading by example. In the last 5 years, the agency has reduced the size of GSA's occupied space by 40%. GSA also helped its customers reduce their occupancy in GSA-controlled space by over 2 million square feet in fiscal years 2015 and 16. In fiscal 2017, we partnered with federal agencies to dispose of 123 non-performing or vacant assets government-wide, which generated $115 million in gross proceeds. Regarding IT modernization, last year began establishing 5 centers of excellence. These centers of excellence will accelerate the modernization of IT infrastructure across the federal government by leveraging private sector innovation and encouraging collaboration across agencies. My third principle is to increase competition. Whether looking to buy a product or acquire a new lease, the greater the competition, the greater the value to the taxpayer. In public buildings, over the next 5 years, 100 million square feet of lease will expire, meaning we'll need to reevaluate housing solutions for 55% of our lease portfolio. This creates a unique opportunity to promote market competition. On the acquisition side, GSA has developed tools to encourage competition at the contract level. One example is the Schedule 70 Springboard, which has already helped 32 innovative IT companies with fewer than 2 years of experience join the Schedule 70. Finally, Congress provided GSA and other federal agencies with a critical tool when it passed the Modernizing Government Technology Act. This legislation encourages agency IT innovation and will create successful templates that other agencies can follow. My fourth principle is transparency. Transparency helps expose flaws, instills trust in our workforce and among our partners, and can lead to better competition, more informed policy, and stronger accountability. In accordance with FASTA, GSA released the Federal Real Property Profile public data set, which contains detailed information on more than 300,000 federal assets. Making this data public helps reduce costs, increase utilization, incentivize federal agencies to achieve greater efficiency. It's my hope that you have a clear understanding of the role of the conviction that Dan, Alan, and I bring to our roles at GSA. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Ms. Ochoa, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Meadows, Ranking Member Conley, members of the subcommittee, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to testify. The Office of Inspector General strives to protect taxpayer dollars. In fiscal years 2015 through 2017, our criminal, civil, and administrative recoveries totaled $436 million. In addition, last year alone, OIG auditors identified more than $287 million in questioned costs and funds that GSA could put to better use. We produced these results and more on an annual appropriation of $65 million. Each year, we provide GSA with a summary of what we consider to be the most serious management challenges the agency faces. I'd like to highlight 4 of the challenges we identified for fiscal year 2018. We included enhancing government procurement as a challenge. Our auditors have identified concerns with the variability and the reasonableness of prices the federal government pays in the GSA Schedules program. For example, a recent audit found that GSA offered identical items on its IT schedule at widely varying prices, and that lower prices were available on the commercial market for many of these items. We also reported that GSA's contract consolidation process resulted in the award of new professional service contracts worth more than $2 billion in annual sales without first determining price reasonableness. GSA is attempting to address these concerns through a variety of pricing initiatives. The OIG has ongoing audits of these initiatives and will remain vigilant in this area. GSA's public building service is challenged to maximize the performance of its real property inventory. In its space consolidation efforts, GSA must ensure that it selects projects that will achieve measurable benefits for the taxpayer. For example, while GSA's tenants may benefit from a reduced footprint's lower lease costs, GSA risks significant losses if it cannot backfill vacated space that remains under lease. We are auditing GSA's management of vacant leased space to determine whether the agency is accurately reporting the amount of that space and whether its controls are effective to prevent unnecessary costs to the government. GSA has also experienced significant challenges in operating its technology transformation services and its Office of 18F, both core components in its efforts to transform the way government builds and buys information technology. My office's reports in this area over the last 2 years found significant weaknesses in 18F's financial management failures that led to routine disregard of fundamental security requirements, and retaliation against the former commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service for protected disclosures about the operations of TTS. In June 2017, GSA transferred technology transformation services to the Federal Acquisition Service and has since taken other steps to address the findings in our reports. While we are encouraged by this responsiveness to our recommendations, we urge GSA moving forward to ensure strong management and financial oversight of the technology transformation services and address challenges arising from frequent leadership changes and high staff turnover. Finally, the most recent evaluation of GSA's compliance with the Federal Information Security Modernization Act found that GSA's information security program was not effective. We highlighted GSA's challenge of prioritizing cybersecurity and our management challenges, and our numerous reports in this area include findings of security vulnerabilities in GSA systems containing procurement-sensitive data, breakdowns in compliance with information security requirements, unintentional mishandling of personally identifiable and sensitive building information, and ineffective agency responses to reported information breaches. GSA is taking steps to improve its security posture, but must do more. I look forward to continuing my office's work with GSA and with this committee to address the management challenges the agency faces. This concludes my prepared statement, and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes for a series of questions. So, Ms. Murphy, let me come to you. The ranking member has, in a less than passionate way, I guess, expressed his displeasure with the FBI decision. So, what do you say in response to that? I mean, at what point is Mr. Conley's concerns not on the mark?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chairman. I've been on this role for about 63 days now, so I want to defer the question to Chairman Matthews, who's been intimately involved with the FBI. What I will say is that all decisions that we made were made at the direction of FBI and their program requirements. So,
Hold on. Before we go to you, Mr. Matt, so what you're saying is the FBI determined that they wanted to be in Washington, D.C., and that's why you made the decision?
among other, the FBI changed its program requirements from what the original campus
What
consolidation
expertise does
required.
the FBI have in real estate?
They have better expertise when it comes to their own security requirements than GSA does.
Well, wouldn't there be a stronger argument for security outside of Washington, D.C. in terms of the footprint versus inside of Washington, D.C., Ms. Murphy? Listen, you're talking to somebody who understands real estate extremely well. I don't know that there's a whole lot of expertise in the FBI. You know, I would trust them with the law enforcement and national security issues. I don't know that I'd trust them with real estate matters. And if your sworn testimony is that the FBI directed you to do that, I've got problems with that.
So the FBI partnered with us. They came back to us and said, and had reduced requirements for space. They were looking at a consolidation for 8,300 people rather than, I believe, 10,600.
Mr. Matthews, do you want to illuminate why this decision was made?
Yes, I'd be happy, happy to, Mr. Chairman. So with the FBI,
And do you stand by it?
by the decision?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So the FBI's role in this, I think it's important to talk about this. The FBI's role in this is in defining their mission requirements, not in the real estate solution, but in the mission requirements. How many people do they need to house in their headquarters facility?
And so did the number of people change in the last,
Yes, it did. It changed significantly. It dropped from 10,600 to 8,300.
so what you're saying is because it dropped from 10,000 plus to 8,000, you could move them from Virginia or Maryland into Washington, D.C.?
Yes, that's the critical mission requirement element. If the requirement was for 11,000 people, then the Pennsylvania Avenue location is not in play. We're not able to put 11,000 people on that site with the density that they'd be willing to tolerate.
So did they adjust their mission requirement based on the fact that they wanted to stay in Washington, D.C.? I mean, why did it change from 10,000 to 8,000? Did we fire that many people at the FBI?
No, so I think it's important to understand where we started.
I'm trying to understand.
So
Let me just tell you, you have a very high bar to convince me, but go ahead.
So the process began with the cancellation of the previous project. And there were very specific reasons why that was canceled, because of the risk of the procurement itself. So if you may recall, it was an exchange procurement.
So you're saying it's less risky to tear down a building in Washington, D.C. and build it back than to make a new acquisition? And you base that based on what?
The previous procurement involved an exchange. So as part of the payment for building this new campus, we would have,
Are you saying that we couldn't sell that facility, Mr. Matthews?
it wasn't a sale, it was an exchange.
But listen, I do like kinds exchanged all the time. Let me just tell you, you sell it, you exchange it. It's a distinction without a difference. So are you suggesting that this was a financial decision?
The cancellation of the procurement was a combination of insufficient funds in hand when the contract would have had to have been signed, and the fact that part of the payment for the new facility was handing over the Hoover building. But without the complete funding to fill the gap between the exchange.
Well, based on
value-
that, you'll never be able to do an exchange ever.
Well, we can if there's sufficient value in the property.
All right, so let me ask you this question. How many excess buildings does GSA have in their portfolio, surplus, public buildings?
We have, I believe, 32 excess properties, designated excess in our,
Surplus? 32?
32.
Where? You mean across the country?
Across the
32?
country, we provided a
Mr.
list.
Matthews, let me just caution you. This isn't my first rodeo. This is not my first hearing when it comes to surplus. You've got staffers there. I would suggest that you go back and modify that, and because I can tell you, if your sworn testimony here today is that there are only 32 surplus buildings in the entire federal,
No, not in the entire federal inventory. In GSA's inventory, we have 32 properties that are designated as excess at this point in time. In GSA's,
how many in the federal government?
I don't have that list.
So, well, if you don't have that list, how do you make a determination on where to move people if you don't know what surplus properties we have? How do you know what decisions to make in terms of leasing?
I just don't have it at my fingertips right now, government-wide, but when we are looking at new real estate solutions,
But when you made the
look at the
decision, did you have that number?
about for the FBI,
No, I assume that you don't just do federal acquisitions and leasing and purchasing just for the FBI.
no, of course.
So when you look at making a decision, and you're making that decision, how do you make that decision based on what is available, what is not available, what is used, and what is not used? How do you make that decision?
So you start off with a requirement from the agency. What do they need? What's the real estate requirement, the functional requirement? First, we look at government-owned inventory. Do we have something
And
available?
so you looked at all the government-owned inventory, whether it's under GSA or under another agency, OMB? Because I know OMB has one component, you have another, which I've never figured out why we do that, but go ahead.
So if we'll have a particular geographic area that we're looking for an agency's requirement. So we will survey first the government-owned inventory, first our inventory, then the government-owned inventory. And if we can't meet it in a government location, then we'll look at private inventory.
Okay. My time has expired, so here's what I would ask you, Mr. Matthews, and you, Ms. Murphy, to do. I need you to get us accurate numbers on the number of surplus properties and underutilized properties that are out there, not just with GSA, but across the federal government, because you cannot make the kind of decisions you're making without knowing those numbers. I can guarantee you it is more than 32. All right?
It absolutely is more than 32.
Okay, I'll recognize the ranking member for a generous 5 minutes.
I thank my friend and thank him for his line of questioning. And let me pick up where the chairman was questioning Mr. Matthews. And Ms. Murphy, I respect the fact 63 days. We're not going to hold you responsible for previous decisions. I will ask you to confirm. You and I met privately. You made a commitment to me in that private meeting that you would respond to all congressional requests and continue to communicate with Congress. Do you now, under oath in this hearing, reiterate that commitment?
I do. In that meeting, I also told you there were certain documents I understand that you've requested that are subject to a lawsuit, and those are out of my hand.
I understand.
But we are going to do everything we can to
Right.
get you the information you need.
I take you as a woman of honor, and I take your commitment just now, and I thank you.
I'd also say in that meeting, you suggested I go out and see the Lorton facility that had been prior
Right.
surplus property. I went out there this past weekend. I very much enjoyed seeing it and how
Good.
they converted that to.
I think it's what Ms. Murphy is referring to in our conversation, Mr. Chairman and my colleagues. I referred to the Lorton site, the old Washington, D.C. prison site, as a great model of how GSA can be a force for good in the community. And it was a win-win kind of decision, and we've purposed the property, and the community has benefited. And GSA, I think, showed a lot of vision and foresight.
They did
in
a
that
beautiful
decision.
job incorporating the historic elements, adding new community
And I'm so
features.
glad
It
you
was
went
a
out.
Great job.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I knew I could count on an Irish woman. And by the way, it's only 30 days to the holy day, St. Patrick's Day. All right, so, Mr. Matthews, you are under oath. The chairman asked you about the FBI, and your testimony is they changed their mind. Is that right?
They changed their program requirements, yes.
They changed their program requirements. Well, let me call it changing their mind, because under previous GSA documents quoted the FBI as saying it identified, FBI, the need to consolidate its headquarters to support information sharing, collaboration, and integration, and then went on to say FBI current headquarter elements, because they're not consolidated, have become fragmented, which hampers information sharing and collaboration. So in other words, there's a functionality issue by having it dispersed. There's a benefit in having it consolidated. You're saying that's changed.
What I'm saying is the FBI reduced that consolidation.
You're going to have to speak into the microphone, Mr.
Sorry.
Matthews.
What I'm saying is the FBI reduced that consolidation from 10,000.
When did it do that?
10,600 to 8,300.
Right, almost 3,000 change.
About 20.
But of course, the reason for that, presumably, is because you've decided not to have the swap and the turnkey and develop a different campus that could accommodate the larger number, but to stay in the current footprint, which cannot accommodate the larger number. Isn't that a logical conclusion?
I think the order was different, but it does allow for that, yes.
Yes.
The reduction was not.
So we're not. So now we're going to allow continued disbursement and fragmentation that the FBI told you in your own document provided to this committee affects its functionality, information and collaboration. Those are pretty important things in an era where we're fighting terrorism, Russian interference in elections, cyber attacks, and the like. Those are not trivial issues. So they're going to continue to be affected according to the document your own agency provided us, quoting the FBI.
Well, the FBI would be in a better position to answer that
Yes,
aspect.
well,
of it,
I
but there
assure you,
was
we'll get to that.
but
But
there
right
wa-
now, you're here,
Yes.
and you're under oath, and I want to make sure we've got it understood. You're testifying the FBI told you that. They changed their mind. Or in your word, they changed their program direction.
Yes, they reduced the requirement.
When did they tell
but
you
that's
that?
an increase.
Right, when did they tell you that? When were you informed they had changed their mind such that you pulled the procurement?
Well, that procurement was canceled before that took place.
Oh.
And before I was there, but
So GSA decided to pull the procurement without that input from the FBI. So you actually pulled a procurement, still believing the FBI felt otherwise, that the FBI wanted that consolidation and wanted the turnkey deal where we had a land swap.
the procurement was canceled because there was insufficient funds in hand to sign the contract, and the fact that that contract involved
Insufficient
the-
funds, that's another one. So the GSA asserted at the time, insufficient funds meant Congress wasn't willing to appropriate money. What's the objective evidence of that? Because I know the chairman and my colleagues probably remember Senator Mikulski at the time actually got an appropriation I don't think you'd even requested as a down payment to show we were willing to provide the funding to finance this deal over and above whatever financing the private sector was able to provide in the sale of the FBI headquarters site.
But the issue at hand was signing the contract without having the funds in hand. It's not a matter of
No,
intent.
Mr. Matthews, let's deal to GSA's statement. GSA made the statement because Congress wouldn't appropriate the funds. And I find it strange, if that's what you believed, that you'd now come back to us in this fiscal year budget asking for $2.2 billion. Do you have faith in Congress appropriating or not? If you do, then the previous explanation is false. And if you don't, then the current request is meaningless and feckless. Pick one.
I would question the presumption that the fact that when you're actually signing a contract, you're obligating contractually the federal government to a certain activities and expenditures, and there was not sufficient funds at that point in time when combined with the procurement.
What would have been
involved
sufficient,
in
Mr.
exchange.
Matthews? I'm curious.
We would have needed, I believe it was about $2 billion extra than
So,
what we had.
so Congress should have appropriated $2 billion and it didn't? Did you ever request a $2 billion appropriation?
The previous administration did not request that full amount.
No.
It was less than that.
I see. Well, this starts to get Kafkaesque. One other issue, because I don't want to impose, my colleagues want to ask questions, but what about the security concern? One of the concerns raised about the current site is that given the sensitive nature of the FBI and the kind of world we live in, the urban setback just won't cut it. It actually poses a risk. Now, doesn't this decision to stay with the existing site fly in the face of that concern? Did that also go out the window? Did the FBI change its mind about that?
New construction?
I'm sorry?
New construction, demolish and rebuild, as opposed to a renovation of the old building, allows us to incorporate significant security enhancements to blast, electronic eavesdropping,
Well, Mr. Matthews,
chemical, biological.
So you're saying it's not a security concern?
What we're saying is we can meet the security requirements of the
Well, that would come as news to the State Department that all over the world has been moving embassies and building new ones with deep setbacks to avoid any kind of security threat. So maybe you should talk to the State Department. Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I'm going to pose a thought to you, and maybe we can deal with it at the end of the hearing. We haven't had time to ask the Inspector General, but I think it would be a useful thing if this subcommittee requested formally a thorough review of this decision and how it got arrived at, and the history, the sorry history of this procurement and the cost to the taxpayer and the private sector associated with this procurement. Because I think this subcommittee needs to get to the bottom of this. This isn't a partisan issue. This is about process, and it's a very failed process, and a very troubling one that I think will expose the FBI, if we go forward with the current proposal, to some real danger.
I thank the gentleman for his insightful questions. The chair recognizes, and we'll certainly look at
I
the
thank the
best
chair.
approach forward in working with Administrator Murphy and certainly Inspector General Ochoa.
I thank the chair.
If I may, would be very happy to come and provide you a detailed briefing. Would be very happy to provide you with a detailed briefing. I believe we've actually reached out already to offer such.
I thank you, Administrator Murphy. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia for 5 minutes.
Administrator Murphy, I sit on the other committee that has jurisdiction, in fact, direct jurisdiction over the GSA. It's been pounded in my head ever since I've been in Congress that there were two basic principles when the government builds or leases: reducing the footprint, and we're taking extraordinary measures at the Department of Homeland Security right now to reduce the footprint because that was authorized before that policy. And consolidation. Those are two basic principles, and I'm not sure there are any other principles that stand at that level. Here you have proposed exactly the opposite, and I ask you to square this circle with me. How do you reduce the footprint of the FBI by building separate facilities throughout the United States from ground up and dismembering the FBI so that instead of consolidation, we're going in a direction that the agency has not gone in since it's been created? So why have you reversed those principles when it comes to the FBI?
Thank you, Congressman.
Consolidation and reducing the footprint.
So, and I'm going to defer again to Mr. Matthews on the numbers, but it is my understanding, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong on this, that under the proposed demolish and rebuild, the per employee utilization rate for the FBI will
The
be
what?
The footprint for the FBI will be smaller, and that they will be consolidated both within the department.
But you're going to spend more money if you have to build facilities in states which are far from one another, far from Washington. If you were going to do that, why would you take parts of the FBI and scatter them across the United States?
And I believe that the FBI identified those locations as places where they already have facilities, and they could engage in.
The point is consolidation. And I don't know what facilities, and I wish you'd name facilities. I know, there may be, we all have offices, there's FBI offices across the United States. But the notion that part of your headquarters was spread across the United States, what? I mean, that's the first I've ever heard of that. Of all agencies, the FBI has parts of its headquarters already in states across the United States. What divisions of the FBI across the United States that this consolidates for?
Dan, I believe it's some of the administrative functions that they are, just as is within GSA, we have some of our administrative functions handled in the regions. They have some of their administrative
Ms.
functions.
Murphy, you don't have facilities in Alabama, and what are these 5 states? How are these states chosen? Why, Mr. Matthews, have you reneged on the notion of consolidation? And why is it cheaper to build from the ground up than to consolidate and with facilities in one place or as few places as possible?
I guess a couple things. One, I would suggest, the FBI is a component of the Department of Justice. So a consolidated headquarters function of the Department of Justice includes the FBI and Main Justice. Main Justice is across the street from the current location. So actually removing the FBI and putting it somewhere else actually...
I'm asking you about the 5 states, Mr. Matthews. You don't have to school me on what the FBI does with the Justice Department. Why do you want to build this across a number of states in the United States rather than consolidate it, as is the principle that you well know you've abided by since your creation?
So again, this goes back to the FBI's mission requirements, but trying to explain what I understand of those is they were looking to being able to move some of the people that are part of the headquarters function, 2,300, into these other existing FBI locations in Idaho, in Alabama. And
What's in Idaho and Alabama, Mr. Matthews?
I think in Idaho they have a like an explosives facility where they analyze.
So what does that have to do with headquarters, putting parts of headquarters in Alabama?
My understanding is they would put some of their nuclear detection elements out there, and some of the things.
Why is this less costly? One of the reasons that the government favors consolidation is that it is the least costly way to build an agency. Why is it least costly to spread the agency across 5 different states?
Well, I guess one thing I would say, building a building as opposed to building a campus, building the building is less expensive than building a campus. There are numerous components of a campus that bring additional.
Well, that is news to me, Mr. Matthews, because you have campuses throughout this region. And the notion that building a building is less than a campus rather than just the opposite, you will have to supply this committee with documentation for it. And again, you're tossing around words when you say building a building is, building a building is building a building, whether it's on a campus or not. And a campus is simply a plot of land. The reason you want them in the same place is because you want the FBI headquarters. And understand, we are talking about headquarters here, aren't we, Mr. Matthews?
Yes, ma'am.
We're talking about headquarters. If we were talking about different facilities, that'd be one thing. We're talking about spreading the headquarters of the FBI across the United States, and I know of no headquarters of any agency spread across the United States. Well, you took a hell of a lot more time than that.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair took 1 minute and 32 seconds extra. He gave the ranking member 2 minutes. He gave you 1.5 minutes. So for the record, we've given you more time than our side, and I'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, for 5 minutes. And the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia knows that I consistently try to be fair in all regards with regards to, and if she's suggesting that I wasn't, we'll take that up at another time. The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I start my question, I just want to say to Ms. Murphy, it was refreshing to hear that you actually understand what this committee is about and your commitment to continue to respond to our inquiries and understand the responsibility that we have as a committee. So I look forward to you keeping your word on that.
And you won't remember me, but I was a staffer at the Small Business Committee when you sat on the committee, and very much enjoyed working with you back then. So thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you. My question is, allow me to take this to a personal level. So GSA, in 2015, announced a plan to invest $70 million and consolidate many federal offices. We had an office on Michigan Avenue. In that process, IRS said it would move 90 jobs to Tennessee. Now, in 2015, the economy in the city of Detroit was one that was hanging on by a thread. And so whereas some people would not respond to the federal government closing a building and moving out of the state, it was a major slap in the face. And the entire delegation, congressional delegation, came together to urge the IRS to look at, because property was a bargain then, to look at existing properties, which you did. And we were able to keep those jobs in Detroit, and also for you to be able to find cheaper property. So I was really confused because I could never get an answer on why you just, in the middle of the air, said, okay, we're moving these jobs and the IRS is going to Tennessee. And then we talked about the wasted millions of dollars on a project to relocate the FBI headquarters. I think you see our concerns and then cancel that move. So my question is there what kind of study is put forward? And I would like to talk to the FBI again about that. But to you, Administrator Murphy, do you look at the demographics of impact on community? When you, because I work for the federal government, you can be offered a job where it's going if you can't relocate. Sometimes you get severance pay if there's not another federal job. What do you look at when you make these decisions? Because they seem to be so random, or some covert actions that are happening, and GSA always backs back and never has a real answer. It's all this political gobbledygook. So talk to me about that.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Hopefully this won't be gobbledygook, but so when GSA, the first step in any consolidation is that agencies come to GSA with a program of requirements. They tell us what they need. We will proactively outreach to some agencies to say we think we can help them consolidate within space, or they have a lease that's about to expire, to try and get them to better identify that program of requirements early so that we can be a good partner with them. At that point in time, Mr. Matthews' organization, the Public Building Service, works with them to take that program of requirements. You come up with a delineated area where that requirement could be met. Do you want to go further into the detail of
And
the
Mr.
process that you
Matthews,
take at that
when
point?
you're answering that question, no one had talked to us as a community. And once we reacted and demanded and talked, we were able to satisfy that need. So that's why there is this disconnect. If you had said whatever your needs were in that community, but no, you came to us and said, we're moving the jobs to Tennessee.
So I'm not familiar with the details of this particular example you're describing. I've been in the position since August, but I understand that the IRS over the past several years has basically had a massive restructuring of their workforce, their locations. They've closed a number of their facilities. And I know in Detroit, there was one of their key processing facilities was located in Detroit. I know I've actually been out to that facility, which the government bought, interestingly enough, for $1. It was a build-to-suit lease facility, and we had a purchase option for $1, and the government actually acquired it at the end of the lease. Mm-hmm. And so the government is reusing that facility for some other federal agencies that are in the area. But I do believe the IRS, they've closed a number, they basically consolidated their processing functions. tax returns have been largely paper-based for years. Now they're mostly electronic, so they've restructured their tax processing units, and I think that is what drove those changes. But
So
I'd have to
my
talk to
time
IRS.
is running out, and this is what I want to really be clear about. You're moving around just because someone randomly say, I want to consolidate, so I'm just going to pick up. There are communities that are affected when you make these decisions. And had we not had the desire and the passion to come to you and demand and offer you other options, it wouldn't have happened, that $1 sale. So there is a gap, there's something missing, and we need to incorporate that, Ms. Murphy and Mr. Matthews, when we start talking about uprooting and moving federal offices without any consideration for local government. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and let me welcome fellow Missourian, Ms. Murphy, to the committee. Is this your first time before us?
This is my first time as administrator before this committee. I
Okay.
testified here probably 11 or 12 years ago once as
See.
well.
Well, as a fellow Missourian, let me say welcome, and we do intend on fulfilling our obligation as oversight.
The Show Me State, I expect nothing less.
And I look forward to working with you. You know, Ms. Murphy, this week, GSA announced its baffling decision to build a new FBI headquarters at the inadequate site of the current J. Edgar Hoover building. It's baffling because GSA itself had concluded that the current site was too small to allow the agency to consolidate its operations, and that there were serious national security risks with staying at the current site. GSA's own building project survey said, and I quote, "Key FBI headquarters elements have become fragmented, which hampers information sharing and collaboration. The FBI has identified a need to consolidate its HQ to support information sharing, collaboration, and integration of strategic priorities." Ms. Murphy, every other agency in the intelligence community, CIA, DIA, NSA, and Homeland Security, have large campuses which they consolidate their operations to prevent both physical threats as well as spying. Why has GSA denied FBI that same ability? Who wants to take
Is
it?
it all right if I defer to the Commissioner Public? He was much more involved.
I
in
had a
this.
few
Okay.
questions for him anyway.
Okay.
But go right ahead, Mr. Matthews.
Yes, Congressman. So first thing I would say, there is a consolidation going on. In fact, the population, the FBI consolidation onto this location will grow from the current roughly 5,600 people to 8,300. That's almost a 50% increase in the number of FBI personnel that will be located, consolidated into this proposed demolish rebuild. So there will be a consolidation of FBI employees, a significant increase of the headquarters headcount in this program.
Okay. You, Mr. Matthews, you dedicated 20 years of service to the U.S. House of Representatives. And I'm sure you're aware that for more than a decade, GSA planned to build a new consolidated FBI campus outside of the District of Columbia, and this was a huge undertaking for the entire government. This week, GSA announced its decision to build a new FBI building on the current site. Can you explain what appears to be an inconsistent position?
Yes, you're right. I've been involved in this from the congressional perspective for well over a decade, and you're correct. The previous plans were for a larger consolidation, a larger requirement of 10,600. And if that is when the requirement was 10,600 employees for the FBI, that's not going to fit on Pennsylvania Avenue. It necessitated a different location, a larger footprint. But with a smaller number of required people for that facility, that put other sites into play, not just the current site, but other sites as well. And there are distinct advantages to the current site when you have this smaller footprint. For example, the transportation network that exists at this site, Metro, the road networks, they're already there. The infrastructure that would serve that facility, particularly the classified communication cables and things like that, which are very costly to replace, those exist there already. The utility fees exist there. The water systems, the basic infrastructure that feeds that facility, which is expensive to replicate, is already there. And from the FBI's perspective, their employees, they live all around the Beltway. And if they relocated to one particular site on the Beltway, no matter where it ended up, they would put a large portion of their employees in a very, a difficult commuting situation. And I know that was an important issue for the FBI, their employees' positions. So it's the reduced headcount that made it possible to stay at that location. And again, like I said, there are very distinct advantages to that.
Would my colleague yield for a second?
Well, I'm out of time. Perhaps the chair will let us do a second
I would just say to my friend from Missouri, that's an extraordinary explanation, and it makes sense only if the previous 6 years did not exist.
Sure.
It flies in the face of everything GSA and the FBI argued for the last 6 years. Now we have a new, forget all that. There's a new explanation. And oh, by the way, physical security has to be discarded on the current site. I thank my friend.
I thank my colleague for those comments, and I'm out of time, but I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding to the ranking member on the time that he didn't have, but we will recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for our panelists for being here today. And I just assured my colleague, Mr. Connolly, that I would not ask anyone on the panel today about cows, since I'm from Iowa, so you can relax.
I was hoping you would ask about cows.
There's a story there, obviously, but we don't have time to get into that. Late last year, we got received from GSA the following, that there are 108 time and attendance systems, 86 learning management systems, and 46 financial management systems within the federal government. I'm a career small businessman, not a career bureaucrat. Duplication of services, I have to believe, is a big issue in the federal government. And this committee deals with waste, fraud, and abuse. If we want to talk about the waste, it's the duplication of all of these services. And in the private sector, when we have an acquisition, for example, and a combination of two companies, one of the first things that we look at is to eliminate duplication. We don't need two accounting departments. We don't need two computer systems that do payroll, and there's efficiencies gained there. The federal government, this has to be an issue. So I think I would direct this to Ms. Murphy and also Mr. Thomas. Talk to me, please, about GSA and the role you're playing in the shared services model, which I think is a great thing. It's very important, can save taxpayers a lot of money. How do we get rid of duplication of services?
Thank you very much, Congressman. Reducing duplication is one of the 4 principles that I've set out for GSA while I'm in my current role. And I believe that Beth Ingerman with the Unified Shared Services Management Group at GSA actually testified before this committee over the summer. She's been doing wonderful work with her team to go in, partnering with other agencies, identifying requirements, looking at solutions that could get us to core systems where we could reduce that duplication. That's taking, it's bearing fruit. We went out with a draft request for proposals for payroll systems last month. We've gotten a lot of feedback back on that. We're working through that. We hope to go out with a final RFP soon so that we can engage in an open, transparent, competitive process so that we can better meet the needs of federal agencies, reduce duplication on payroll. We see that just as the beginning of the process, though, as we're working on that contract vehicle, which ties in very nicely with what Mr. Thomas is doing. It also then gives us the opportunity to start analyzing additional systems, be it time and attendance, financial management, contract writing systems, so that we continue to search for ways we can reduce duplication. If you look at the entire mission of GSA, I mean, the Public Building Service is about having a shared service around federal space. The Federal Acquisition Service is a shared service around acquisition. So we see it as absolutely consistent with the mission of the agency to help agencies reduce this duplication.
We could reduce cost of purchasing as well, couldn't we? Instead of buying 68 duplicative systems, we buy one.
The fewer contracts that we want to make sure that we have the appropriate number of contracts, so we always have competition and we always have redundancy, because we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we only have one system and something goes wrong. And then we have a workforce at risk, or we have a system at risk. So we need to make sure that there always are multiple options. But I do think that, yes, rather than having 108 time and attendance systems, if the federal government had 3 or 4 that it could work off of, it would make a lot more sense.
How bad is it? Give me a grade, would you, please?
Oh.
Be honest.
Can I grade my own? I'd prefer to grade GSA rather than to grade other agencies, if that's all right with you. So within GSA, we've got a lot of work
in
to
the federal
do.
government in general. Give me the duplication of services. How bad is it?
There is a fair amount of duplication. We've made some progress with lines of business and consolidating financial management, but there's a lot of work to be done, and I think it's not going to be a one-year quick win. It is a long-term effort. I know that the chairman has been very supportive of the work that we're trying to do on shared services, and it's going to require, I'll give you another example, the telecommunications contract that Mr. Thomas's office has just released, gives us the opportunity to further consolidate telecommunications services within the government. It's just a great opportunity of ways we can get reductions. The fleet. One of our performance management initiatives for next year is looking at studying and then reducing the number of fleet vehicles government-wide, and seeing if we can save money by reducing them. Alan, I think you've got good statistics on how much we can save that way?
Sure, thanks, Emily. So on fleet, there are about 600,000 vehicles in the federal fleet. GSA centrally manages about a third of the fleet, so 200,000 vehicles. Based on FY15 numbers, we think on average, we can manage a vehicle about $2,500 a year more efficiently than an agency-owned asset is managed. So there is some significant savings there government-wide if you were to consolidate some of the fleet that's managed at the agency level currently.
If the chair would indulge me, can I add one quick add-on question,
Very
please?
quick follow-up, yeah.
What
Thank you.
what incentives are there for the federal government to try to reduce duplication? What incentives are there for the rank-and-file federal government employees to save the taxpayer money?
So
Try to answer that succinctly if we can.
succinctly. So if you're the CFO of an agency where your mission, say at USDA, is to ensure the safety of the food we eat, and you're spending too much money on vehicles and you're not spending enough money on inspectors, the fact that we could come in and save you some additional dollars on vehicles and you could maybe put that money towards mission, I think is pretty compelling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman from Iowa. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Conley, for a few items that he wanted to bring up.
I thank the chair. Mr. Thomas, this committee sent you and your predecessor, Rob Cook, 2 letters, one addressed to you, one addressed to him, dated August 30th, with a series of follow-up questions from the hearing. We have not, 6 months later, received a response. Any reason why?
We are still coordinating internally on the response. I asked the same question as we were preparing for the hearing. We are diligently working on getting you responses to those questions.
How do you define diligent? I mean, if you're coordinating for 6 months, at what point can we expect answers to the gentleman's question?
I don't know if I'm ready to commit to a specific date, but it is something that we're putting a focus
Okay,
on.
I'll give you a date. 14 days, we need an answer.
Mr.
Okay?
To both letters.
Understood. Thank you.
I mean, Administrator Murphy, you can see what we're dealing with. I mean, that's why we put you in our private conversation, we had so much emphasis on communication and responsiveness. The position of some people representing GSA saying we'll only respond to requests coming from committee chair is absurd. It flies in the face of our oversight responsibilities. And by the way, I assure you, my Republican colleagues will be a little nervous about that, because should things change around here in November, they want the privilege of having inquiries answered by a federal agency. And by the way, they should, but so should we. And so I understand there's some litigation, but I want to reiterate, I appreciate your commitment. But this is an example. 6 months?
Sir, when I was with the Armed Services Committee, I put a request in October of 2016 for a briefing from GSA. I was at GSA before I got the briefing. So I know I've got a problem. I know, and we are working to.
We need your help. Yep. And I think that would be a great piece of your legacy to clean it up. But Mr. Thomas, I got to tell you, I think on a bipartisan basis, the idea that you've had 6 months and you won't commit to a time, how long it will take to actually answer fairly straightforward questions based on a hearing that was over 6 months ago, just unacceptable. I mean, even for government. And it's just not an answer I don't think the chairman or I could possibly live with. And I thank the chair for setting a deadline. And I think it does underscore the problem of responsiveness and communication in GSA, and it makes your job harder and it makes our job harder. Finally, with respect to the FBI headquarters, and you've heard from my colleagues, including the representative of the District of Columbia where it's headquartered, all I can say, Mr. Matthews, is I just do not feel your answers hold up. I think they contradict, as I said, 6 years of laying the groundwork for a different rationale for where it ought to be located, the value of consolidation, the danger of lack of consolidation, and legitimate physical security concerns. The rationales coming out of the GSA do not add up, whether it's we didn't have the money because Congress wouldn't appropriate it, or the FBI has changed its mind. You know, I'm going to discuss this with my colleague, the chairman, and we'll see how we proceed. But at some point, we're going to want to see the documents, contemporaneous documents from the FBI that gave you a different direction. But this is not a good moment for the GSA. What I really worry about, besides process, is the mission of the FBI and how it could be impeded, frankly, by this decision. So this is, you haven't heard the last of this from me, from Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton, from Chairman Meadows and others, we will revisit this issue at an appropriate time. I thank the chair for his indulgence.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes himself. I want to kind of conclude with a couple of things. Inspector General, I want to say thank you for being here. I don't want to ignore the fact that your presence here and the lack of questions is any indication. As you know, I'm a huge fan, not only of the Inspector Generals plural, but of this particular Inspector General specifically and the work that your group does. Here's what I would like to ask of you is I would like the top 4 recommendations that you would have that either have been met with a lukewarm receptance from GSA's perspective, or 4 that have been rejected and that you see as having the most significant impact on a variety of issues. If you could get that to the committee in the next 30 days, is that something that you could do?
Be happy to do that, Chairman Meadows.
All right. And I want to, for the record, express sincere appreciation to your entire staff for the work that they do on an ongoing basis. As we all know that the GSA, because of one photograph, has probably a very different impression. You know, it came from obscurity into a position of very, well, it made the news, and your involvement and certainly in trying to correct that is acknowledged. I also want to acknowledge the staff that we have here that have done a great job. There are a variety of additional questions that we will need all of you to answer for the record as they've prepared and have done a good job. Administrator Murphy, I want to hit on one area because in the NDAA, we talked about the e-portals that would actually start addressing and allowing us to be competitive with that. It's my understanding that you have a March deadline due to Congress in terms of the progress of that. Are you going to actually make that deadline?
So I have reviewed the draft report and approved the draft report at this point. So it's, we're in the process of clearing it with other agencies and making sure that's correct. We've been trying to make sure that that's the beginning of a conversation. We had 200 industry participants come to GSA to meet on the issue. We had another 300 participate virtually. So it's, we're taking that opportunity seriously.
Yes or no, will you meet the March deadline?
We will meet the March deadline.
All right, thank you. And then finally, I would like to ask on that aspect. You know, we talked about really the FASTA guidelines, and then you've got kind of this internal infrastructure. Are those working hand in glove? Are they competing with one another? I'm not sure exactly. You know, in your testimony, you talked about a infrastructure. Is that working hand in glove with FASTA or not?
It is working hand in glove with FASTA. So a lot of the work we've been doing in preparation for the board being sat is in place, but it also means that we're continuing to work on our own processes. And it's the requirement, for example, for the database has made it much easier for GSA to do its own work as well.
Okay, so I'm going to conclude with this to-dos. There is much work to be done in terms of surplus properties. Mr. Matthews, the 32 number, I can tell you based on GAO reports, based on previous reports from GSA and OMB, it's just nowhere in the ballpark. And so I need accurate numbers there. Administrator Murphy, you have a previous staffer from here that actually worked on my subcommittee, Mr. Post, who I want to acknowledge here today. He's a great asset, I'm sure, to you as he was to us. But he will also tell you that I will not let this rest as it relates to the FBI building and the decisions that were made there. This is a bipartisan issue, and I can tell you that before you proceed ahead, this committee wants to know all the decisions that went into making the new decision that has been announced. I don't agree with it. I can be convinced, but at this particular point, based on the information in this hearing, I'm not convinced. And so I would like a briefing and a follow-up in a bipartisan manner on this particular issue. If there is no further business before the subcommittee on government operations, this committee stands adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a status question?
Certainly.
I would also like you to get to the chairman, the timeline for a consolidation that Congress did mandate, and that you're doing the largest federal project in the United States, the Department of Homeland Security, to make sure that the GSA is on its timeline for a project which exemplifies consolidation as the FBI does not.
Yeah, and I would concur with the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia. If you can give the committees, both minority and majority, an update on that, that would be good. If there is no further business before the committee stands adjourned.